So I'll call the meeting to order, and Quesnel City Council does recognize that we meet on the traditional territory of the LHTAKO DENE Nation. With respect to the agenda, we have two items. One is the actual printed staff report for K1. The city manager will present, and the other it's just an omission on the agenda. There'll be an N4, which will be second reading of bylaw number 1928, which is the rezoning application for the Ramada Inn. So that will be N4. With those two changes, can I have a motion to adopt the agenda? Councillor Vic, Councillor Rund, second. All in favor? Any opposed? Carried. BC Housing, Malaki Nemi, if you want to come up and get yourself set up. Just a reminder to the gallery that this is a normal, regular meeting of council. There is an opportunity if you wish to ask questions of council on a procedural basis or items of the agenda at the end of the meeting, but there are to be no commentary and no back chatter during the meeting. This is part of our democratic process, and we will protect it. So this is a sensitive item. We're very much aware of that, and there's a public hearing scheduled for next council meeting where the public will have every opportunity to engage with council. So with that in mind, Malik, if you can introduce yourself and Amy and proceed with your presentation.
Hello. Thank you, Mayor and Council. My name is Malaki Tohill. I'm the Regional Director of Operations for the North for BC Housing.
Thank you, Mayor and Council. I'm Amy Wong. I'm Director for Regional Development for the Northern Region.
And the floor is yours.
Thank you very much again for Mayor and Council's time to give us the opportunity to present today. Today's presentation is going to be about the summary of the public engagement results that we received, and also a presentation of how we could, at BC Housing, address some of those concerns raised in the supportive housing model that's being proposed. So, presentation's up. I trust it's up on the back as well. Oops. Do I navigate through this? Sorry. Okay. So I'm driving this, right? It changes? Is it changing on the screen? Okay, great. Okay, the first slide is regarding the purpose. We wanted to take this opportunity just to reiterate the purpose of why we're here. Due to COVID, many units were added in the community to help with social distancing, isolation, and improve safety of the community. We have an opportunity under the Provincial Housing Permanent Housing Plan, the PHP, to provide permanent housing for those that were brought into temporary accommodations. The permanent housing plan has a limited window to access the benefits of these funds. We must purchase the building and do the renovations by March 31st, 2023. BC Housing has identified a potential site, which is the Ramada Inn, for the purchase and renovation for providing permanent homes in the community. We're here today to continue the collaboration to deliver housing and support services with the community. We're seeking support on the site and service delivery and the rezoning application. So BC Housing, we are one party to the element of housing and homelessness. We're here to seek a collaborative approach in addressing the homelessness in your community. We're just one of many partners that we asked to come to the table to address the homelessness challenges in the community. BC Housing's mandate is to provide both capital and operating funding in communities, and we definitely are looking for partners with Northern Health, local First Nations, the city, community and local businesses, and the Housing Society. What is the need in Quesnel? In 2020, there was a point-in-time count in Quesnel that showed 121 people in homelessness, experiencing homelessness. The application before you is a proposal to allow BC Housing to relocate existing programs from Seasons House and the Grace Inn, which is also offering temporary housing, to a central location, the central location being Ramada Inn. This would allow Seasons House to close and be repurposed for future community needs. So the property is 383 St. Laurent Avenue. So if approved, this would provide the community with up to 45 units of housing for individuals who are experiencing homelessness. The 45 homes may also include the capacity up to 15 shelter spaces and 10 extreme weather response spaces, depending on what the community demands will be. So where are we now? We have a property that's available for purchase. We are here to request a rezoning for the current use to allow permanent supportive housing and a shelter use. The space is enough to deliver the permanent housing and services that we see the need for, and it also has proximity to the community services. The purchase timeline and renovations is to meet the funding deadline of March 31st, 2023. So after the application was submitted, the engagement process advanced, and it took many different forms. A neighborhood letter was sent to 1,272 letters were mailed out to the local businesses on August 17th. There was also organic media articles that were in the various papers, and also digital and print advertisements that ran in the Quesnel Observer on the 17th and 24th of August. Out of the 1,200 community interactions, which included to seek feedback, to hear concerns, to listen to the community about what those concerns are, we had 1161, over 1,000 people complete the feedback forms. We had 2 community pop-ups to have a more closer engagement with the neighbors and the businesses. That ran both on the 23rd and 24th, and it had about 110 conversations with BC Housing members and members of the community. There was also 5 stakeholder meetings held with 6 different organizations. What did we hear? After all the engagement, here's a sample of the questions as part of the feedback form. And in summary, it really summarized into 3 main topics of concern: proximity to the downtown core and the impact on the businesses, concerns around mental health and addictions, and concerns around community safety. In summary, it kind of all fell into one of those 3 key concerns. So the next couple of slides, Mayor and Council, is the ability for us to just showcase what supportive housing and permanent housing can do to address those concerns that we heard from the community. Often concerns, neighborhoods, we've been to many, which raise these common concerns. We've heard it in other communities as well. But with supportive housing, I think the key difference is it's not temporary housing, it's permanent housing. So we're offering, with this funding, permanent homes for up to 45 individuals. Every dollar that gets invested in supportive housing, we have studies that show it puts $4 to $5 back into the local economy in social and/or other economic value. We've done many supportive housing projects across the province, one here a few years ago with Bridges, and has seen success in those supportive housing models being operated to address homelessness. This slide is really to highlight how do we integrate into the neighborhood. How does supportive housing get managed? So there is 24/7 staffing support. There is a process about resident selection. I think Malachi's raised this before, how, there is a, resident selection process is important because you want to make sure that there's a balanced tenant population in there. Some with higher needs, some with lower needs, and it's balanced, and you're not filling all of it with high needs that are requiring higher needs of support services. There is, property maintenance, we hear that, where, how are you making sure the sites are cleaned and there isn't, garbage or carts or, things that it's still maintained and respectful of what the neighborhood is wanting to see. There's also design features. We look at SEPTED, we look at safety, we look at, common things about, people congregating around the streets, and we hear that. And, supportive housing sites, it allows, space for people to come in and use outdoor space that is within the building. We felt the Ramada layout, the exterior layout, allowed a good fit for that there could be a central courtyard, which residents could still go outside and not be out on the streets, the residents that use the building. There are program agreements, right, Malachi, that I think the key thing is between the tenants and the operator that the tenants are respecting what the intent of the program is, and I'll go into that the next slide. And also, we've seen this success as well, is the creation and continuation of what we call the CAC, the Community Advisory Committee. And that really is about forming a committee so that all is heard, all is continued to be heard about what those concerns are. I've seen CAC forms even form before occupancy, so even during, in this case, the renovation period, even before occupancy, the doors open, so that there's an opportunity for the business association, the neighbors, RCMP, health, the city, First Nations, all the different partners that we had outlined earlier on the slide, to come together and have a platform to say, well, as this party, we have these concerns. You as BC Housing and Operator, how is this going to be addressed when the building's opened? And it also allows for a continued platform to be heard. We encourage that the CAC continues even after occupancy, so that people have a place to go, and it's not like you've passed this and then there's nowhere else for people to raise concerns. And really looking at a collaborative approach to work together as part of the CAC to address the community challenges. So what does supportive housing look like? Again, I wanted to bring my point back that supportive housing is permanent housing. So currently what we have at Seasons House and what we have at Grayson is just temporary housing. With permanent housing, we're now offering people a permanent home. It's their own home. It's a self-contained home. They're not worried and not thinking about, how do I need to think about putting shelter over my head tonight? How do I need to think about my next meal? In supportive housing, they're offered their own suite, self-contained, they're provided meals, and they're also not, because they don't need to worry about shelter and food, which is, life essential things, they now can focus on what are the support services that I can access to deal with mental health and addiction services, to deal with what are the life skills, what connection can I get to the local community services, and connection to education and employment, because one's not worrying about how do I get shelter tonight and how do I get fed today. The homes is there. The roof is provided. They can now start to work on the other parts of their lives. Which is really, back down to those core issues that we heard, right? Working on, what are those services that I can get connected to for mental health and addictions? What is, they'll have a permanent home. They don't need to be in a transient environment where shelter is just a temporary home. And how can I start working on respecting that I have my home back to those program agreements that we identify, that they take ownership. It's their home now. As noted earlier, supportive housing offers the 24/7 access to staff and support services. So really, supportive housing starts to offer the operational funding and homes that people can start working on those key core issues that are raised by your community as concerns. We have an opportunity to access the permanent housing plan, and one way to see it is it's a way to bring a community asset in to start addressing some of those community challenges. So we have an opportunity to access and gain a community asset to deal with some of the challenges the community is currently facing in permanent homes. What is the timeline? Right now, we're in September for putting forward the second hearing, and the rezoning the public hearing is September 13th for council to vote on the end of September. If the rezoning is successful, we would then bring the formal approval for the funding for the community of Quesnel, and then start building renovations through the fall for occupancy in early spring. What does next steps look like? We recognize at BC Housing that the application's before you for council to decide and approve this, whether to approve this proposal. I also wanted to highlight what would next steps look like if the application was not approved. This would mean Seasons House Shelter would continue to operate its temporary housing, and the COVID-19 beds at Grayson would not, at this point, continue past March 31st. That's the information we have at this point. Because we do have a limited window to access the funds, we'll have to move the funds to another community. We do want to keep it in the city of Quesnel. We want to keep this asset. We want to bring this asset to help address the challenges. And of course, we're always here to continue to work with the local First Nations and the city and partner with organizations to approach, addressing the homelessness that we're currently facing. Here's a slide on what resources are available. If Mayor and Council would like to see where we grabbed some of the information, we have a supportive housing video from Bridges to show the success of how supportive housing could work and the successes from implementing this housing model. And then we also have stats from a community benefits report.
Thank you, Amy.
Thank
Malky,
you.
did you want to add prior to opening it up for council?
No, I'm good for now, Mayor.
Thank you. Council, the floor is open. Councilor Paul.
Thank you for your presentation. I have several questions, one of which I'm going to ask right now, and that is, has BC Housing made an offer to purchase the motel with a subject to being a successful rezone?
And Councilor Paul, I'm just going to ask you if you can pull, because we have Councilor Rudenberg on, pull your mic just a little bit closer, and that way people can hear you better.
Yes, Councillor, there is an offer in place that is subject to rezoning, successful rezoning.
Okay. Other council members? Councillor Vic.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I appreciate the information you've delivered here again, and we've heard much of it before. I guess my question goes to feedback that I've certainly heard in the community pertaining to what occurs in terms of programming that allows, specifically, we're talking about individuals coming to a facility are banned or not allowed to be at the facility, but end up remaining there, often causing harm to community. And I've asked Malachy the question, but I'll ask again. What assurances, what guarantees, what programming can protect neighborhoods from individuals that may end up in your facility and then subsequently removed, but end up not leaving? Those individuals end up causing harm. What can you tell us today that would allay those concerns?
Either one of us? Thank you. You know, once they leave their apartment, like any place, and they go out into the community, it's pretty hard to be responsible for that individual's behavior. I will say that right off the top, right? I mean, they certainly are going to be responsible for the behavior that's within inside the complex that they live, and even maybe close by it, you know, if it's out on the street or the sidewalk. I think that's where the coordinated access or the community engagement piece really happens, and having the RCMP at the table, knowing which ones are going to be the troubled ones, and how do we deal with them and get the effective programming in place for them. I know for myself, I've been in contact with Northern Health's executive as recently as this week, actually, and talked to them extensively about this and the other supports that are required to keep people housed, because the mental health and addiction part is a really difficult piece, and to keep people housed is difficult too. But, you know, I think with the 24/7 staffing, I think we make sure that they have a clean team that can clean up around the area. 24/7 staffing, of course, to be on the lookout all the time for things that are going on in the community. And not only that, for the society to respond to some of the concerns that would come forward. I'll leave it at that.
Councillor Goulet.
Thank you, and thanks for this. I'm looking at the what the services that will be provided that you provided to us. I'm looking at mine on page 33 of 47, and I'm just wondering about the case managers. And are they going to have like 45 case managers? Because that's a lot of people for one manager to look after and make sure that those people are they're cared for and they've got those services that are needed. And then I guess I have two questions, and then the other one sort of off the topic, but that one first, and then if I may, I'll come back to a second question. But just curious on what that operation model will look like for those case managers.
Yeah, certainly they're going to be speaking with the residents about building case plans. They kind of try to do that now. Where are they headed to? Where are they going to? I think it might change over time. Certainly at the beginning, some are going to be fully engaged in wanting to do different things and to move their life forward. I think just stabilizing them at first, and then some of them will do it right off the bat, but some of them are going to wait to do that case planning. And you're right, it's a lot of work. The person has to get up and do some of that work themselves too, though, right? I mean, they got to get out. If we're making appointments at doctors or anything of that nature, then they got to make sure that they get there and take care of business also. That's sometimes difficult for some people. You know, a quick story I'll say is that I remember a number of years ago, I moved 8 women in who had been long-term shelter users, 10 to 15 years living in a shelter. And I put them in their own unit on a floor with staff on the floor. And you know what the hardest thing was the isolation that now they're living alone. To sleep in the bedroom by themselves, they couldn't do it. They had to sleep on the couch because of fear. Because don't forget, they're used to living in a communal environment, and all of a sudden, that changes till you find yourself in a room by yourself. And that sounds all great to all of us, But if you've been living a certain lifestyle, it's how do you get that grounded to be able to do some of that other work that has to follow. I do want to say this too. We are working, I talk to Northern Health on a weekly basis. Actually, I could have maybe even had somebody here tonight, but it is about coming up with more of a plan, what we're doing in some of our communities right now, Fort St. John, Prince George Terrace, to get some of that extra mental health and addiction support, because you're never going to get a job or change your life from behind a dumpster, is what I'll say, or suffering from mental health and addiction issues.
Councillor Elliott.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. First of all, I want to thank you for being here today. I'm sure your job isn't easy. And I want to thank you for thinking of Quesnel and our needs, because, you know, it is important, and we have too many people on the street, and something has to be done for sure. You mentioned Seasons House closing, but it would remain in community for community needs. Would that still be with BC Housing?
The building certainly would be, right? But I'm open up to what ideas we'd want to use it for. If you think that I would go back to, well, I believe that it was that you're going to change the zoning on it so it couldn't be a shelter anyways, I believe. But I wouldn't want it to ever go back to being anything like that. We're making this change for it to be positive. Can I think of other uses for it? I probably can, but nothing that I wouldn't flesh out unless it came from a community need and it was agreed on by the community as far as it goes for that building. I think we've all wanted that thing moved since probably 16 years when it opened. Fair enough, right? But I would not be opening another shelter there or for that current usage in any way, shape, or form. We would have to discuss that and see how some of our other partners, maybe they could use it in some fashion.
Okay, because that is a definite concern in the community for sure. So we looked at the timeline, but I'm curious because a lot of people have mentioned, and I think council has mentioned it to you as well, that it's been a difficult timeline for us, right?
Yeah.
Here we go. We're starting off right now. We need a decision ASAP. So when did you actually get the funding for this?
Do you remember when? I mean, not long ago. I mean, it really came that fast. And
I'm just looking at the time lapse between when you got the funding and when the first presentation to council was.
yeah, I would have to go back and see when that was. But if you're thinking that it's months, I've heard somebody say last year it was nothing like that. Nothing like that at all. This was very short time, and we had to act quickly. I can get that time frame for you. I don't have it right in front of me.
I can tell you the first conversation that we had regarding potential funding, and at that time it was looking at the Grace Inn, was September 27th, 2021. So that was when we were first engaged in the possibility that Grace Inn might be a target for,
and
that's where the people are located.
Yeah, I'm not sure if at that time this funding was available for that, if we were just looking for Grace Inn. I don't recall it that way, but maybe you have other information.
So again, on February 28th, 2022, it was the first time BC Housing staff engaged our staff about potential rezoning for Grace Inn.
Yeah, I remember going down there and seeing it.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Yeah. We can get the timeline for sure, Councillor Mayor, but early in the year, like February would have sounded right, because we too was like, we got to go fast on this, right? And we approached the community, contacted city staff to see, where could, we have this opportunity to access this funding. It's going to have to, it is fast, right? And what would that timeline look like?
Yeah, and for clarification for the gallery and the press, when we have any developer, public or private, engage us in those kinds of conversations, we are not at liberty to reveal that. That is a highly sensitive matter involving both legal and financial transactions. So that's why we can't then turn around and say to the developer, you got to go tell the public about what your thoughts are until the developer is ready to come in front of council and put in a formal request for something. So just for clarification. Go ahead, Councillor Elliott.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Yeah, so I'll just leave that where it is. You mentioned the successes at Bridges House, and once again, at Bridges, I want to thank you for that. There's no doubt about it, because everybody deserves a home, a roof over their head. But there have been some challenges too. I mean, there have been some severe challenges in that neighborhood. So we're talking about a clean team here. I mean, we could still use some help over on that side. I don't know if you've heard about the school and some of the disturbing things that are taking place and left on the schoolyards and in the neighborhood. It's a challenge. So I'm not confident that something right downtown would be any different, but I hope it would be. Once again, back to the timeline. You mentioned after the purchase of a location, then you would put together a community advisory committee. Now, in my mind, for a community like ours that is in desperate need of housing, why wouldn't we start that before? Why couldn't we get the community advisory committee together beforehand, get all the stakeholders together at the same place and start having those conversations, maybe even before the money's available, so that the next time the money comes up, we've already gone, okay, look, we've got a location, or at least we've got a game plan with the whole community, including the First Nations, because everybody is affected by this. So doing it afterwards it seems a little strange to me.
Yeah, it would be great to have done it before. I think, certainly moving forward, whatever the outcome of this is, I've already spoke, like, say, to downtown business and guaranteed that I'll be there on a monthly basis. And if I can't, my staff will be, to start working on that, to really listen and hear what's going on. You're right. And however, it seems like it's a long time when we say a short time to get things timed in time frames, but it's also picking the community. It's going through all the other work of seeing the other hotels, doing our due diligence on all that. That does take a length of time that I might feel is a short time, but is actually quite a bit longer. I do want to say this, no matter what way the outcome of this all is, right, we're going to continue with those meetings. I've spoke to them just the other day on this, last week or last Friday, I believe it was, when we had a meeting. And we're going to continue to work with them and to come up with exactly that piece right there. I think the city, if I read the paper there, that they're looking at doing the same thing. We definitely want to be part of that. I think there needs to be a strategic plan when we look forward and down the road. There's lots of other housing to do. I will say this, if you look at the housing, if you look since 2019, it's probably 100 units, seniors housing, family housing. And again, when you look at the whole housing continuum, right? This is just an aspect of it. We've hit a lot of those pieces on it, and I think we need to continue to do that for not only the people that are on the street and homeless, but also for affordable families, affordable seniors, and those other services required. We're going to keep doing that, but we need to have that all together and that strategic plan to be able to accomplish exactly what the community wants.
I think that would be extremely important for the community. If we could all sit down together before, right, and hash it all out, and then start talking about locations and where it could be best served. Go ahead.
Yeah, if I could add one more point to that. Absolutely agree with Malachi, and how do you continue those conversations to see what works for Quesnel. The other thing is just how the funding comes, right? So we can have the conversations, but we're always looking to what funding availability do we have at that point in time.
Yeah, I agree 100%. If I could.
I just want to add one thing. That said, right, there's also something I used to always tell, it's also be prepared.
Yeah.
And that's what we're doing through these meetings, is getting prepared for when those other funding pieces come up, no matter what that is. Might be families, might be homelessness, might be supportive housing, whatever all that is, then the community is ready to go. That means ready in that we all have a common purpose and goal to what we're trying to achieve. It also means, do we have land or a building or something identified that we can go after, and how do we do that, so that when that funding does come, and I've had this done before, it's who's ready to go and get the shovel in the ground, right? That really helps us move that forward.
Agreed 100%. And that's how we work on our budget as well, is try and get all that work done in advance. One of the things that you mentioned was that since I think the stat of 121 people being homeless, 100 homes have been created. 100 places have been created. I think that would be an interesting stat to have right beside the need of 121 or 131, whatever it was, because there's been a lot of work done.
Yeah,
right?
yeah. The 100 created was the two seniors developments. We actually have one that's still being built on Front Street right now. That's for families and for individuals. I think it's going to be later this year or early spring. And we got 10 units up with LHTAKO DENE that should be open in the next couple of months.
Perfect, and I appreciate that.
So it's more of that trying to look at all of it.
Yeah.
Last comment. Have you been in contact with the First Nations about this situation? Because it's my understanding, it's come to me that 3 of the First Nations are not in support of this.
Have you had any conversation? I think we reached out to them, but I can't. No, I have not personally met with them or talked to them about this at all. No, I have not.
Thank you.
So I'm going to make sure we use the first, second speaker rule in this case. So Councillor Rudenberg, I see you haven't used your electronic hand, but you're the one that I don't have yet. And then I have a couple comments. And then I have currently on my second speaker list, Councillor Paul, Councillor Runge, Councillor Vic, and then we can keep adding to that. So Councillor Rudenberg.
Thank you. And unfortunately, all I see is a big queue in front of me, so I apologize if I don't look like I'm talking to you. So this is, I want to go back to your process that you use to inform the community of the public meetings that you held, because what I heard was that many of them did not receive your timeline letters in time to attend those public meetings. Many of them, I know you said that you sent them out on the 17th, many of them did not receive them until at least the 25th or later. So I know, I'm not sure who that is on, but part of the problem is what I'm hearing from the community is that people did not know those public meetings were happening. And so when you talk about the anxiety levels going up because they've not had that opportunity to speak, and yes, I know there were pieces in the mail, on social media, and there was, all of that. The anxiety level of people who were not able to get that in a timely fashion was huge. So I'm just putting that out there for you. The other piece is when you talk about the funding. So if this doesn't happen here, because this has been one of those hurry up and let's get going here because our funding is done at the end of March. I really have a hard time thinking that you're going to be able to take this funding to another community. If I look at the process that we've gone through to get to where we are right now, because we're on this tight timeline, I cannot imagine you're going to have enough time to get to another community to be able to process what you need to do in order to spend that money by March 31st. Just another comment out there. Malachy, you made a comment around setting up these meetings so that when funding does become available in the future, we have the community with a say. And that's what we want to see happen. That didn't happen at the beginning of this. This was kind of like, here's what we got, now come talk to us. So what you said didn't happen. And I think when you look at the pushback you're getting from this community, that is part of the reason why you're getting the pushback. And yes, we know we need purpose-built rentals in this community for all spectrum of housing, not only for our homeless community, but also for our seniors and low income. We know purpose-built housing is an important piece for this community, and we need to keep working on how we get that to Quesnel. Thanks, Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Rudenberg. Did you want to riff off of something Councillor Rudenberg said, and then I make a couple of comments?
Yeah, it's like it would have been great to have done this and have it a long time before and go through all that. I get it, right? However, we also have been busy with building a lot of housing in the community. This money really did come up in a short. We had to respond really quickly. I looked at a number of communities other than Quesnel. But this is a community, well, you can see a lot. I've done a lot in a lot of communities that I'm committed to. And when we move forward, we will have those meetings and we will develop that proper plan. I brought it here because I've seen an opportunity to hopefully for change, not only for the individuals, but to support the community of Quesnel. And that was, I get the timing and I get what should have happened. Shoulda, woulda, coulda, ain't going to cut it at this point in time. What we can do in the future and how we'll work together. And when I say be prepared, it's so we are prepared for those housing pieces that come up. I think we've just been all busy, mayor and council and BC Housing in providing a whole pile of housing in a number of communities. Not one to use that as an excuse, but we've been busy doing it and putting in there what we can as soon as we can. I can just look around here and say that. But yeah, we certainly, and we'll work on that moving forward. That's good, guaranteed to commit to that, because that's what's going to be required for the future housing options that we have coming up.
Thank you. A couple of things from me, and then we'll go on to the second speaker's list here. And thank you for your forbearance, both Amy and Malachy. I think it's fair to say BC Housing is going through a bit of transition just now. It's in the public domain that the board was fired by the province. The CEO has retired or resigned, whatever it is that he did. And the audit findings report indicated there is some systemic problems within the organization. I think this is illustrative of one of those circumstances where we often end up being forced as local government to be at odds with what appear to be resources being offered to our community. And as I indicated at the last meeting that we were at, in today's world, particularly right now, we're experiencing an encampment on the Riverfront Trail. If we're going to get any legal injunctive relief, we can't be saying no to any housing resources. We have to do full due diligence. And as a council, we needed to let this go through its process because BC Housing came to us and said, we have these resources, we're interested in this property, and council basically said, go and test the will of council. But it was also the statement of council to BC Housing quite clearly that we did not believe that the Ramada Inn would be accepted by the community for a variety of reasons, and I want that to be known publicly tonight. And we asked BC Housing, as many respondents have asked, for alternate locations to be looked at. So one of the questions I've got, and again, I think this is a process that begged a lot of questions in the community, and because it's hurry up, a lot of those questions are still begged and not answered. But if you take a look at the survey results, I think there's some interesting tidbits in here. First off, on the first question, so for those who are tracking this, it's page 14 of our package, 14 of 47. Where the question is, do you agree that there is need for additional permanent supportive homes in Quesnel today? The number who strongly agree and the number who strongly disagree are exactly the same. And to me, that's a function of trust. For many years, we've indicated, and I'm curious, is anybody here in the gallery representing the operator, Quesnel Shelter Society? Because we asked specifically for the Shelter Society to be present. Director
Thank you,
Turner.
yes. And the Shelter Support Society did have representatives that were going to attend tonight, but there was quite a bit of discussion about this would be just a presentation of the communications
Findings.
results, so I said absolutely wasn't necessary for them to.
Okay, thank you. We did ask, though, for them to be presented. And the reason I'm raising that is because BC Housing comes in, acquires the units in some form, and then turns it over to an operator. And it's fair to say that this council has echoed, as the Downtown Association and others, deep concerns about the operator that we have for our shelter and whether or not that's created as more grief than we needed to have. And that same operator operating Elliott Street, and it's that operator that would operate this facility. So I think there's a trust component, and I would say that, a lot of people are strongly, disagreeing with the need for more because they think that more causes more problems for them. But if you add that to the, do you agree that permanent supportive homes in downtown Quesnel, specifically downtown Quesnel, will help address the city's homeless crisis? 55% strongly disagree. If you take a look at the feedback, and I'm now tracking on pages 16 and 17, With respect to the downtown core location, it is the highest number of respondents saying we think there's a problem with the downtown core location for this. And Malachy, you know, we've had conversations over the years about why this coming to the downtown core. We have a small downtown footprint. We're very protective of it. We've invested the living daylights out of it. We have a strong relationship with the Downtown Association on marketing it. And, you know, can you explain from BC Housing's perspective what your limiters are for where you look to build supportive housing projects or shelter projects? What are those boxes that you're basically working within?
You want to go with that?
I think, well, from a development side and an operation side. So from a development side, obviously, you know, we'll look at where's there available property that you could acquire. If you don't land on the land, you don't have a willing seller, it's not even a location you could consider. You know, we look at proximity to services, you know, who is being housed and is it close to the different services that they need. We also look at, you know, what the zoning is. We would work, make inquiries with city staff to look at, you know, what are the zonings, what's permitted, what is it a rezone, what would, so we'd go into that due diligence on zoning. So from a development standpoint, of course, you know, you have a willing seller, you do your due diligence on all the different environmental pieces, the appraisal, make sure that, you know, a willing seller is asking for a fair market value. So from a development standpoint, we look at all those pieces.
And the other piece to that, too, is I think, especially around the shelter, if you have transportation, like when we look at seniors housing that's accessible, that can get them to a downtown core and back out again, because that's where they mostly do come and hang out. That's where the services are. You'd probably have some success with that. When it comes to a shelter, if it ain't within close walking distance, my concern is, and I don't think I have a shelter outside of a downtown that I can think of in the north anyways, is that then they won't go to it, and they'll stay more downtown, and they won't travel to go to the shelter at night, and you end up not solving a problem, but potentially having a bigger one that you end up having to go back and change later on. I don't know what that would look like, but certainly we wouldn't look at, you know, you wouldn't put a shelter, say, out by the A&W, if I could say it that way. It would just be too far out. I don't think they would use it. You'd get a few that would use it, but I don't think it would get the use that it should get use.
And I think it's important for the public to understand the matrix that you work with on that. You know, we can go around and contest it, but that's the matrix that BC Housing looks at.
Yeah, well, when you think about it, they might have to go to the hospital. You know, there's overdose issues.
Yeah, and again, we've had that conversation of, can you solve that by bringing services to? Can you solve that through a transportation piece as opposed to that? I just wanted to clarify for the public that that's the basis upon which BC Housing takes a look at where they would potentially locate things. Just a couple more for me, and then we'll go back on to second reading. So with respect to what we're trying to resolve here with this hurry-up money from the province, effectively, because it's not the normal way BC Housing operates. Normally, BC Housing would put a program out. We would do a bunch of work with BC Housing. We would then apply for the program, et cetera. This is quite different than that normal practice. My understanding is that you had about 14 or 15 individuals in Grace Inn that were part of the overflow from the shelter during the COVID window, and then the shelter would come into this facility as well, so that Grace Inn, which is becoming a problematic property, and the shelter would be then not having those services delivered, correct? That would be the intent, that the Ramada picks those two things up, and those two are not operating anymore through a BC Housing.
Yeah, when we talk about the operation of Grace Inn, just for clarity around that, we've leased rooms in there, 13 units. That was to put people in that needed to be isolated during COVID and to create some social distancing. 10 of those were, I believe, in the shelter. The 13 that are at Grace Inn, from what I understand and know, as of this day today, there's only 4 of those rooms occupied at this point in time. The others have moved on to wherever they've moved on to. And so just to clarify that.
Thank you. So with respect then to our most recent venture into supportive housing, which is the Bridges facility, do you remember, or does Director Turner remember, how many people from the shelter actually ended up qualifying? Because, Amy, you've got in your presentation that there's some rigor on whether an individual is ready or not to go into supportive housing. Not all of the individuals who are living on the street or in the shelter would qualify for supportive housing. They either have mental health issues that, don't allow them to be within 4 walls, they have violence issues, or whatever the case may be. Does anybody remember approximately how many on that first intake at Elliott Street were from the shelter that qualified?
I have no idea myself.
Because my recollection, it was only about a half a dozen that were regular shelter users.
We did get an estimate at one time, but it wasn't confirmed. I don't believe it was.
But it wasn't high. Like the preponderance of the individuals in there were from other locations. They weren't shelter users, is my recollection. Because that's part of the thing I think the community needs to understand, and we need to understand better. BC Housing has a kind of a let's build units approach. The housing first approach of shelter into supportive housing into market housing or independent living with some supports. But what we find as a community and most other communities, and I've been talking to some mayors, is every time BC Housing invests, we have a problematic property. That's our experience here. The Seasons House investment is a problematic property. The Elliott Street investment is a problematic property. We just had a conversation with one of our First Nations leaders who's involved in the daycare just up the street from Elliott Street property or Bridges, who his lived experience, if we want to use that term, is getting out with some volunteers and cleaning needles and human feces and all of the things that they were promised would never happen if we built a supportive housing unit over there, and the same goes for the school. So that's the community's lived experience, if you will, with BC Housing investments in our community, and we've long said that we have a real struggle with the Shelter Society as an operator, because we do not believe they exercise the kind of rigor that's promised on the front end of these projects, and it causes a lack of trust on the back end. And that's what I see in the response here. There's no trust. And so my final question, and then we'll go back for second round, Amy, you've indicated effectively that what you're seeing here is NIMBYism, and you're throwing it on council to deny this project. Is it your experience, and Malachi, you were at Spirit Center, that this is just plain old NIMBYism, like we experienced at Elliott Street or with the shelter, and that councils of the day said no? We don't think it is right, that the people who are opposed to this are not seeing it right, and they approved those. Do you feel that this Ramada situation is of a different kind, that it's just a flat-out rejection of both the process and the location?
So what we're doing is we have brought forward a potential opportunity. We submitted a rezoning application, and today we're presenting the different survey engagements, outcomes, all the different concerns raised. We're here to present to council. We heard the concerns, and we're also presenting how supportive housing could help address those concerns. And we're presenting the facts, we're presenting our program for council to make the decision on the rezoning application. We're presenting the different ways that we can address those concerns that were raised, and options that, could be accessed.
Okay, so I want to be crystal clear, and then I'm going to go to Councillor Paul, then Runge, then Vic. Amy, we've been through this before. We've done this dance before. We've been given those promises about what supportive housing will do. We've been promised that, good neighbor agreements will resolve problems on an ongoing basis. It has not been our experience. And I think that's what you're butting up against. We have not had that experience, and so therefore, why would this community say yes to one more investment that then becomes another problematic property? That's what we're up against. Councillor Paul.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I actually had two more questions, but Mr. Tohill, your response to Councillor Elliott's question, which was basically the same as my question, is most encouraging, and what I'm going at there is how it appears that you are agreeing that the community consultation committee or advisory group should come into play before final approval is granted rather than after. And I think that move would go a long way to building much-needed trust. And if you want to respond, I've got another question.
Yeah, I just want to say I don't count it till it gets to final reading. I think it's just important that we do that. We have a plan forward, and when something comes up, we have the opportunity to jump on it right away, knowing what the needs are.
Well, I just want to say as an addendum to that, and I think you would agree, that our funding eligibility would be much improved and much enhanced with community and council approval of a game plan before construction started. Would you agree?
If I understand the question correctly, yeah, we would always, I think what I'm talking about is for us to come up with that, working together as that strategic plan, along with the proper services involved, which means having Northern Health at the table, First Nations Health Authority would be extremely important to have at the table, and having the nations that are around here at the table and determining what we're going to do for the future. And hopefully executing that when the funding becomes available for those different programs.
Okay. With all due respect, that seems, your reply right now seems to be at odds with what you reported out earlier. I heard that the community advisory group would start once approval has been received.
Oh, you're talking about on this project. Sorry, I wasn't thinking of it the same way. I was thinking in general. Yeah, that's okay,
yeah, thanks.
Sorry.
We'll leave it there, but I do have another question.
Councillor Paul, if you don't mind, I'd like to clarify, because we've had this conversation ongoing. So what's happened in the past, and we've looked at some best practices where there's an intention for an investment, there's an opening in the normal program opening. So for a targeted group, there's funding available, et cetera. That's when you can start that process of saying, okay, just like we do for other grant applications, you bring some people together, you say, what's the best way for us to take a look at this? We would bring stakeholders, operators in. Then that, sort of evolves into your community advisory. In this case, it was very targeted money from the province that didn't end up triggering that kind of process. That's the difference, I think, between the two.
That's absolutely right.
Okay, thank you. And Mr. Tohill, earlier, probably about a half an hour ago, you alluded to your contact and regular consultation with Northern Health. Mm-hmm. Do you agree that supportive housing should be a formal, structured joint effort between BC Housing and BC Health/Northern Health?
What I can say to that is that there certainly is lots of ongoing conversations and around those that suffer on the street from mental health and addiction issues. In some cases, or in 3 right now, we haven't got them started yet. We're about to, because we have the supportive housing. A new supportive housing just started in Prince George. We opened it about 2 months ago. We opening one in the next couple of months in Fort St. John, and we opened up one about a year ago or so in Terrace. In each one of those buildings, we are putting some what's called complex care units, right, that will have medical staff being able to look at them. They'll be the hardest to house in most cases, right, or have a lot of the difficulty where they need that extra medical support or a nurse support. So we're looking at doing that. I'm not sure what will happen after that because that's Northern Health, so they can answer to that. I certainly can't. But I know that we're doing that in 3 communities. I know that we know that that's important, and we know that for people to have success at long-term housing, some of them need that. Because I think there's even some people that won't be able to be housed because of their current mental state, to be honest with you. So,
Okay, thank you. Councillor Runge and then Councillor Vic.
So thank you. And just for clarification, this is the first time going over things. Anyway, so I'm just going to, I thank you for the presentation. I just wanted to be upfront. I do appreciate everything that you've done. So because I've been left here kind of dangling, I'm going to reiterate, like, a lot what I was going to say, the challenges on bridges, the site location, current plans, lack of advisory committee, Indigenous engagement and timeline, purpose and location choice have all already been discussed. So, but from the survey, I'm finding that predominantly the community is not in favor. They're not against housing. My read is not against the housing when you look at the numbers, but they're not. They're really the proponents of the responses are about not having the housing in the downtown core. So, I going forward, I hope that, we can look forward to, healthy discussions, planning things into the future, housing needs of all, because they come in so many different levels, and that, that we move forward. I just currently, I can't go along, having heard from so many community members, it was, I think, 99.9% opposed. I really can't go along with this right now.
Councillor Runge, I'm going to caution you because this is a delegation presentation, not a decision. You're going to have that opportunity on second reading to go into that. So this is for questions and answers with the BC Housing presentation.
Okay, so yeah, all right. So then my question is, and it will be having, what I would like to see going forward is some of the stats from the other communities on how those housing, all the new housing places they put in Terrace and Prince George and all the other places. Is it possible to also get some, or are you keeping running stats, or does Northern Health keep the stats on how they, are successful or not successful in the community?
So I think we've done some community impact studies. We could probably get some of those from some of the communities may of equal size and see what that says, right? I think we can do that for sure. When I say I'm constantly in contact with Northern Health, you got to remember that we also do assisted living for seniors, right? So we have certainly discussions around that. We come up with different things. I know it's the first one in the province, and that's we wanted to help out those that were suffer from dementia housing. It's in Vanderhoof, and we have 8 inside a seniors building, independent seniors building. Upstairs there's 10 units, and downstairs we have 8 units of dementia housing. And what that was specifically for was to help clear out some of the people that were suffering from the onset of dementia and Alzheimer's that were actually living in the hospital and taking up bed space. They should and they deserve the right to live in community. And of course, we had to build it and design the bottom floor in a certain way that would support that community. But those are other things that we also talk about, because for me, it was helping create flow within the community. You have people in long-term care that are physically able to get around. They have the onset of dementia care or Alzheimer's, and they're stuck in the hospital until a time, I'll say it that way. So it's important to get those people out and get them into housing so they can have a better quality of life and to free up space for other people to move around through. So there's lots of different things with Northern Health that we work on and that we try to accomplish, not only around the mental health and addiction issues. And if we have and we will have those meetings coming up to what does the community determine, that's where we need a health piece in it too, because is there a way that we can help out some of the hospital usage and long-term care people, individuals in it?
Yeah, and we do have Northern Health representatives here tonight. So, Councillor Vic.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Sorry, guys, one more. I'm going to go back to the concept of preventing harm in the neighborhood, and allaying safety concerns. And Councillor Elliott and the Mayor both referenced bridges. And certainly we have data, we have information that calls for service ballooned in bridges, the neighborhoods surrounding bridges. So we're living through challenges. We're not negating the benefit that those extra supportive rooms have certainly helped that community, but it's the collateral damage, if you will, in that neighborhood, which is causing us strain right now and affecting trust. So it becomes a question of logic for me that if you're going to put a denser project in a denser neighborhood, denser in both the population of people living there and denser in terms of commercial activity, if you're going to put a denser project in there with 45 potential units and you don't have a specific plan to protect citizens or people living in that neighborhood, that's a problem, because we're living that problem in a smaller microcosm at the Bridges neighborhood. So without a plan to deal with what inevitably could be, you can easily transport the same issue at the Ramada site. There has to be a plan, and I'm just not hearing that right now. Can you allay that concern?
I think of it a couple of different ways. I am kind of searching for an answer. I must be honest about that. I'd like to know more about what's going on and the cause of what's going on in and around Elliott Street, around Bridges. I think that would be an important piece, and is there anything we can learn from that? As I said, it's pretty hard when somebody's off the property. If somebody uses a way off the property, I don't know how that goes back to the shelter operator. I mean, they don't have a safe injection site. They probably have, I'm not even sure if they have OPS. We'd have to take a look at that. But I hear your concern, and I think we would have to have a longer discussion around what does that look like and what does that mean for the community in all truthfulness. I don't want to just come up with some answer that's at the top of my head. I've explained about the 24/7, awake staff and those type of things that are going on, and they have their eye out for it. But if there needs to be a more robust plan, and that's what the city would require, then I think we would have a talk with that when we're getting together as a community group and come up with something that we know is going to be successful. However, I do want to say that shouldn't be put all on the society to solve all the problems in the community. I think it's a community effort also, and if they are part of that problem, then we have to figure out what that part is and respond to that.
Just before I go to you, Councillor Goulet, just to feed off of Councillor Vic's point and maybe make it a little bit more pointed, is there a BC Housing representative involved in the Good Neighbor Agreement discussions with respect to Bridges?
I don't believe they're part of the Good Neighbor Agreement.
Yeah, no, they aren't. And so a Good Neighbor Agreement, of course, was a requirement for that to be built. It's an opportunity for the neighbors, the association, et cetera, downtown association, business associations to talk to the operator. Mm-hmm. That's an ongoing process. There, again, with respect to this business of trust, there is a lack of trust in what happens in that process. So from an operations perspective, does that operator have accountability back to BC Housing to report what happens in those discussions, what the neighborhood wants to see happen, and whether or not the operator follows through? Is there an accountability mechanism direct to BC Housing in a situation like that?
Not from the Good Neighbor Agreement, because we're not, at this time, we're not part of that. What I'm hearing, though, is that there might be a need to be part of that to hear some of those things that happen at that table.
Yeah, what I'm getting at, Malachy, is I think it's fair for you to add to your workload and say you're going to be here every month.
Won't be me.
But within the BC Housing structure, once a facility is built, once an operator's in play, then it's basically up to the community to work with that operator to try and meet what was promised, right?
Within the Good Neighbor Agreement, that's correct.
Yes.
Yeah, within the Good Neighbor Agreement. And in the other agreement that Amy was talking about before, the community piece, right? Then we definitely want to be part of that and move forward, yeah.
Councillor Goulet.
Thank you. And just listening to some of the questions here, and just my thoughts are going back to about 60 to 70%, I believe, in that range are people awaiting our Indigenous and looking for home, and that's a huge number. And I'm a little concerned with the engagement with the 4 bands. As you heard, there was a comment made that 3 have opposed. That's a little concerning when there's a high rate of Indigenous who are looking for housing and being part of the process. And my comment was already answered. I was going to ask about the Good Neighbor Agreement and the accountability for the provider, whoever that is. Where does that fall to? Is it BC Housing? So the operations model, is it BC Housing or is it the operator when things go awry? But I think that the mayor asked that question. But I just wanted to make a comment about the Indigenous and why not engage with the bands right from the start, because they do have the highest population that are in need of housing.
I believe it's one of the strategic priorities of the government. I'm sure we have a number that it's at, and I don't know where that is. It's 1 or 2 or 3 or something like that. But certainly that is one of our critical pieces. I know I work a lot with a lot of nations across the north. We're building housing right up the road on a nation right now. So it's certainly we're hearing that. I think if you look at the housing that we're building right now on Front Street, it's going to be Indigenous or led by an Indigenous organization. The other ones that we just built up the street are the same for Indigenous. I've heard the population could be even around 80 or 90% Indigenous, and we have to do a good job at that. We have to create more of that housing, not only on nation, but in urban environments also. When I take a look at some of the, on the West Coast and some of the nations that we have worked with there, those nations are putting housing in an urban environment for their people, whether that be for elders in some cases, or for families, or for some of their younger individuals who actually work in town, right? I'm thinking of the Kitkatla on Dolphin Island. They can't get back and forth every day to work, so they stay in town to work. So I think we got to do, we do a good job. We got to do a better job, because you're right. It's just not right where the population and what the need is on the ground for it. And as we start working together, I think we'll identify that, and we'll be able to respond to it, not only as BC Housing, but as a community too.
Okay. For myself, and then we can start to sort of wrap things up here if I don't have a second or a third speakers list. So with respect to the commentary about the chiefs, just so that we're clear, I now meet with the chiefs on a community leadership basis bi-monthly, and it's the chiefs of the 4 First Nations that have a historical and territorial relationship with Quesnel. So it's Luskus, or what people would refer to as Kluskas, NASCO, Estella, or the Alexandria Band, and LHTAKO, what people refer to sometimes as Red Bluff. That has allowed us to work on some real projects together. And of course, we have the community forest, the joint application for community forest, all 5 communities putting that in and collaborating. Last week, we had a situation around the encampment that we have on the Riverfront Trail, and I was able to ask if the chiefs could join us in a very important meeting there with less than 24 hours notice, and we did have 3 of those chiefs, 2 of them in the room, 1 sent a representative because she was in community. So I did reach out to them today and ask them about this versus a proposal in front of council on our first agenda item to do a more comprehensive community planning exercise on mental health, addictions, and a better community-based housing strategy. And those 3 chiefs have given me permission to state categorically that they support the city's process and do not support advancing the Ramada project at this time. So just to clarify those comments. The question that I have for you to kind of close this off, because I think it's part of the struggle everybody has with this, and my wife chides me when I use the term, but there's lots of magical thinking going on in the world these days that somehow if you say no to something, a whole bunch of stuff will disappear. If you say yes to something, a whole bunch of stuff will be resolved. In your experience, both of you, when investments are made in communities, if we could actually build supportive housing units for the 100 or so that are supposedly homeless, would that end encampments and vagrancy and camping in our community?
I don't know.
Well, I can tell you it won't.
I would hope that it would have an impact if you're building that, but would it end homelessness?
No, I'm not asking if it would end homelessness, because this is part of the trap I think that the community really struggles with.
Right.
We have people who will not go within 4 walls.
Right.
They're paranoid schizophrenic, they're on, methamphetamine or whatever the case may be, and when they get squirrely, or they're too violent. There's all kinds of reasons why we will still have people living on the streets in our community, regardless of how many units we buy. And that's why the province, or build, that's why the province, under the former housing minister, was talking about a strategy for the hard to house, a specific targeted strategy. Mm-hmm. So I think, for the community to understand, we can keep building units, but if they're not the right units for the issues that we actually have on our streets, we're not going to resolve the issues that we're dealing with. We've actually offered, in many cases, housing to the individuals who are currently camping on the riverfront, only to have them rejected because their preference is to camp on the riverfront. And if we know, if we go to a judge and ask a judge about that, the judge will give them the right to keep camping and negate our right to deal with the public safety issues that arises. So I think it's really important for us to say we need a plan that actually takes a look at what the needs are in the community. Not a unit plan, but a needs-based plan. And that's one of the struggles I think we're having with this, and a lot of people are asking the question of what does it solve?
Right.
And what won't it solve? So the final piece, I think, and Councillor Vic noted it, one of the reasons that council said to BC Housing, we did not think the Ramada was going to fly in this community. There's 2 key reasons for that. One is the presence of a peer group called NOPE on St. Laurent that has caused nothing but grief for this community, and is part of most likely servicing the client group that may end up in this facility. And the second is it's in that interface between residential and commercial. So whereas Seasons House right now isn't in the interface on the residential side, it's commercial, and it's a little bit arm's length from the core commercial. This is a building right in the core commercial and bleeding into residential, and I think that's what you're finding from folks, is they're just simply saying, yeah, that's not a place to put this, right? So, I'll be frank, I'm disappointed that what we're getting is a presentation that suggests that we've got NIMBYism in the community and it's up to council to decide what they're going to do, and that, the normative approach to supportive housing is going to resolve the issues that the community has had, because we haven't had them resolved. We've done this dance before. And so, what you're effectively doing as the proponent is not listening to the community saying, yeah, this doesn't work for us. And I want to be crystal clear about that. And you're pinning council to make the decision as to whether or not it works for the community or not, which then puts us in opposition to each other. And that's highly unfortunate, because we've had a very good relationship to date. We've had lots of investments from BC Housing. I hope we continue to have investments from BC Housing, but depending on council's outcome tonight of our first business item, we need to take the bull by the horns and create our own plan and make sure that we're not in this situation again, right? That the next time BC Housing comes, we know where the investment needs to go, we know what it's addressing, and we know what it is we're attempting to do with it. So So closing comments from you two. I don't have anybody on the speakers list, and then we'll go on to our regular agenda.
So, yeah, I appreciate, what you're saying, and I'll say this about the relationship. I've probably, 16, 18 other communities that I have issues in, some of them with encampments. But it's that strong relationship and the work that we've done in this community and the respect that I have for yourself, Mayor and Council, that why I brought that money here, to try to do something here. Wasn't just trying to push something through fast, not caring. Wasn't anything like that at all. It was my respect for this community and the work that's being done in it and the relationship and the housing that we've already done here. It's to enhance, to support the community. If it doesn't end up that way, fair enough, but that's the intent and why we're here, is to build that housing and hopefully make change in the community. It's great that we'll move forward with another plan and do that. We need to do that regardless. But out of all the ones that I had to choose from, I want you to know I choose here because of the strong relationship that we do have and the work that we've done in this community already and we want to continue to do. And that this won't, whatever the outcome is, won't change any of that in my mind to how we move forward and other options for other housing as we continue to try to meet the needs of all the communities. I do want to say too, though, going back to the other people being on the street and those type of things, that's why we're working closely with Northern Health. It's what are those other services that are required to have there to keep them housed and to try to get those that can't be housed and to stay housed, right? We look at it 6 months is usually the figure. If you can keep them housed for 6 months, you're usually going to have a level of success. It's not only the mental health and addiction, it is about how do they cook again, how do they make their bed. It's all those things. It's very complicated, but thank you for that, and know that we're here because of the community, and no matter what ends up happening at the end of the day, we'll continue to work with that community. We'll sit on those committees that come up that you want to set up, and we'll do our best to hit those goals.
Thank you very much to both of you for coming tonight and making your presentation. And thank you, Malachy, for the comments about this does not preclude us from continuing to engage with BC Housing if indeed Council determines that this should not proceed. So thank you. Okay, thanks. And for those in the gallery, this matter will be dealt with by Council on a second reading basis in the bylaw section. There's no room for commentary in this meeting. Okay, I've been given, my wrist buzzed me because I've been given a note that we have not adopted the regular minutes of August 16th. I move too fast. So Councillor Elliott moved, Councillor Goulet second. All in favor? Any opposed? That motion has carried unanimously. With respect to item K1, the city manager will walk us through the proposal.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. This report is a direct result of the recent rezoning requests that we've just heard. Clearly, the community does not seem to have a plan right now, which is a roadmap forward. And in looking at how the process was unveiling itself and how it played out, we still didn't get the sense at all. While that proposal was in front of us, we didn't have an overall community plan or a strategy. So this proposal in front of you is not presumptive of council voting this project up or down. I think it's a valid exercise, more than just an exercise, it's a valid strategic planning process to go through no matter what council's decision is on this actual specific proposal in front of us. So in 2020, council received a COVID restart grant from the province. $100,000 from that grant was allocated by council towards supporting vulnerable populations. To date, that funding is unspent. And staff is planning to engage a consultant to assist with a review of the city's role regarding vulnerable populations and to provide recommendations to help as the city moves forward in areas where it has social responsibilities. One of the outcomes of the current rezoning application at 383 Saint Laurent has been a lot of discussion in the community regarding housing vulnerable populations. Three main areas that are tied to the discussion around housing vulnerability are housing affordability and availability, mental health issues and addiction issues. Mental health issues and addiction issues. These are driving some of the newer trends, such as encampments on public property and the steadily growing number of homeless people. Most municipalities in BC are struggling with these exact same issues and trends. The recent engagement by BC Housing has shown that the city needs an overall strategy and roadmap to help direct our efforts. The goal is to provide advice to a new council and to drive the 5-year strategic plan at its next iteration, as well as to provide useful community feedback to BC Housing for future opportunities. Ideally, this visioning process should occur in advance of future provincial investments in supportive or shelter housing proposals. It bears repeating that the goal is to develop a community-based plan that takes into account the specific needs and challenges in Quesnel and proposes appropriate solutions. Specifically, if we bring a consultant on, they will be tasked with the following: to review the services provided to vulnerable populations by the various social agencies and service providers operating in the cities, including looking at gaps in those services that should be filled. To consider best practices from other jurisdictions, to determine if there's new areas we need to consider. To consider the shelter operations in the city, reviewing the number of units required, the appropriate location or locations for those units, and make recommendations on the operating model, and to specifically consider emergency operations. Emergency shelter operations, with the same as above concern, the number of units needed, the location, and the operating model. And finally, to provide recommendations regarding temporary Indigenous housing needs that arises due to distances from reserve populations to service centers in Quesnel. So it's proposed that this consulting work is to be done by working closely with the various stakeholder groups and intending to engage with Northern Health, BC Housing, and other provincial agencies. One mentioned tonight was the First Nations Health Authority, which would be important as well. Public engagement through that process will also be a key requirement. And that's really being shown through this process, is that if you start public engagement really at the very last stages of a project, the public has no opportunity to react other than in shock and they don't feel they're a part of the process. And I think that needs to change. This process will be led by our mayor and the 4 First Nations band chiefs in this area, specifically LHTAKO, Nazco, Kluskas, and the Estella First Nations. They will lead throughout the whole process, including the selection of the consulting team. And then they will approve that final report coming back. So the recommendation is that council receives this report for information. As mentioned at the start of this report, the city is holding $100,000 of funding earmarked towards support for vulnerable people. So this is not a budget request from council. Council has already approved this funding. We just have not spent it yet. The amounts for this specific request for a consultant actually is a bit unknown at this point in time. We haven't gone out to market and see what we can get. We know we have a $100,000 budget out there. I'm not sure what this specific request would cost. So there's still some work to be done on the staff side on this one. But just throwing this out there so council will see, here's how we're trying to answer some of the questions raised in this process. Thank you.
Thank you, City Manager. And just a couple of points for clarification. The $100,000 wasn't expended because we were successful in getting other grants to run the program for vulnerable populations. So that's what's funding the clean team, some of the work we're doing with peers, et cetera. That's why that money is still there. And the seed for us taking a look at using it to really get our arms around this situation came from Chief LeBrun in a meeting that we had last week that we all need to get to a table. With respect to the city manager's comments about reviewing the services provided, it's one of the key things in Quesnel. We have the most robust suite of services for a community our size, because we keep chasing things, whether it's the situation table, whether it's the ACT team, whether it's the mental health nurse that goes out on the street. And of course, as most communities are experiencing, the situation just seems to keep getting worse and out of control. So I think this planning exercise of sitting down and saying, what is going on? What resources do we have? Where are the gaps? Can we collaborate better? An example on the housing front, I just had coffee last week with our peer clean team, and a couple of them were saying that they're ready to move out of Bridges. And they're at the point where, they feel like they're ready for independent living, et cetera, but the economics of Bridges versus independent living mean that we'll probably be back on the street again because they can't afford to go out into independent living. And yet BC Housing has rent subsidies. So why isn't it sort of shelter, supportive housing, and then the rent sub program to make sure that people don't end up back on the street just because of financial considerations? So that level of coordination, and I have spoken, that's why the Cluskis is to be confirmed. Based on Chief LeBrun's comments last week at our meeting, we've had confirmation from both NASCO and Cluskis, as well as LHTAKO, that they would be very happy to lead and engage in this process, and I'll be reaching out to Chief Lillian as soon as I can connection with her. So this is an information item for council because it's already, as the city manager indicated, funds that are pinned for this kind of work. Any questions or comments on the item? Councillor Paul.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Mayor, and thank you, Mr. City Manager, for that report. This is a comment, and that is that in the penultimate paragraph on page 1 of your report, the last line, public engagement through the process will also be a key requirement. I think it should be the key requirement, and I look forward to that.
Any other comments or questions? Seeing none, that's an information item. Moving on then, no SIP, no correspondence with respect to bylaws, and one, the final adoption of the tax exempting amendment bylaw. Mover and seconder, Councillor Elliott. Councillor Goulet, second. Any questions or comments? Seeing none, all in favor? That motion has passed unanimously. Bylaw 1927, City of Quesnel Political Campaign Sign Amendment Bylaw. This is the housekeeping amendment. Final adoption. Mover and seconder. Councillor Rudenberg moves. Seconder, Councillor Runge. Questions or comments? Seeing none, all in favor? Any opposed? That motion is carried unanimously. Bylaw 1762, Quesnel Road Closure and Dedication Removal Bylaw, final adoption. Councillor Runge so moved, seconded. Councillor Elliott, all in favor? Any opposed? Carried. And then item N4, which is your separate item, bylaw 1880, which is the rezoning of the Ramada property for supportive housing and emergency shelter, second reading.
1928.
What did I say? Okay, 1928. And just want to be clear, depending on the vote on this, this will either proceed to public hearing or not proceed to public hearing at our next meeting. If council votes it down on second reading, it does not proceed. If council votes it in favor of second reading, it advances to public hearing. So that's all we're doing at this stage, is whether or not it advances to public hearing. Correct, Director Turner?
I think there is a requirement to cancel the public hearing as well. I would look to the Deputy Corporal. I think you have to defeat and cancel.
Okay, so the motion, let's have the motion on the bylaw, and then we will deal with the disposition of the public hearing post that. But it's de facto, if you defeat it, you're going to end the public hearing. You're not going to have a public hearing on something council's already defeated. Okay. Okay, so on that, if council wishes to weigh in and state their thoughts, because all we've had is a delegation at this point, or go to vote, it's up to you. I have no speakers list, so on the second reading of the bylaw, all in favor? Any opposed? That vote is unanimous. Now, a motion to cancel the public hearing. Director Runge, Director Elliott. Any questions or comments on that? Director, sorry. I flip hats every once in a while. Councillor Runge, Councillor Elliott. Any questions or comments on that? Okay, seeing none. All in favor? Any opposed? That motion carried unanimously as well. No changes to upcoming meeting schedule, no changes to committee appointments, any announcements or future events. And you can't announce that you're running for mayor. I'm just saying. It's not allowed. Okay? Any announcements or future events? I think Councillor Vic had his hand up.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I wanted to either inform the community or remind the community that this Saturday, the Quesnel District Senior Society, in partnership with the North Cariboo Seniors Council and other partners, is hosting a Seniors Expo at the Senior Center from 8 until 12:30, and it's everything seniors, services that seniors are curious about. They can ask these questions. There's workshops. There's a free breakfast. So any seniors that are curious about what's in our community to support them should go to this event, 8 a.m. at the Senior Center this Saturday. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Vic. Any other announcements, future events? Okay, and then with respect to gallery questions. Seeing none, I would invite a motion to adjourn. Councillor Runge, Councillor Goulet, all in favor of adjournment? That motion passed unanimously. Thank you, staff. Thank you, council. And thank you to the gallery members for their forbearance.